All right, let's do it. Let's talk about the NBC.
All right. Well, we're running. Let's roll it. We're rolling. And so, yeah, let me just check my news real quick. So it looks like in the news, and on the news I'm on, it says, "Not funny. NBC has no comedies on the fall schedule for the first time in 50 years." So that is the news right now.
Wow, that's amazing to me. I mean, comedy used to be the backbone of each network.
Mm-hmm.
For as long as I can remember, it was. Even when they had good dramas, it was still the comedies were the places that they got the most attention and their focus. And
Yeah.
wow, no comedies at all. I wonder how the other networks are doing and how many they have.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I only saw that one about NBC.
So what's your theory? What do you think is going on? You know, you think people are getting maybe so serious that they don't want to, they can't laugh anymore? I mean, what's happening?
I mean, I can't really say because I don't, know any of the decision makers at NBC, but I, in my mind, wokeness could be a part of this. Like the whole woke culture, not wanting to offend anyone, for fear of offending anyone and getting canceled. And also maybe their ratings are not doing that great because a lot of people don't watch TV anymore. So I don't know if that is part of the interplay of what's going on there. I mean, it could be, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's pretty bizarre. I mean, so
You know what it could be, and I found this seems to be true too. That I've noticed that in my teaching, that fewer and fewer students want to be very funny.
hmm,
Even when they're writing the half-hour comedies for my classes,
hmm,
they're just doing dramedy at most. You know,
hmm.
they're just not being, they're just not going for the jokes or the funny or the, an attitude or anything. It just seems to be, and I think there's been a change in the style of shows because there are shows like Atlanta, which is a very good show, but it certainly doesn't seem to me to be a comedy. There is comedy in it and there's humor in it, but in the day I was doing sitcom, it wouldn't have been considered a comedy. It would have been a drama with some comedy in it because there just aren't many laughs. Um,
Yeah, it's actually very interesting because we talked a little bit about MASH and the style of comedy that MASH has and the seriousness for which the show was encompassing basically, of the Korean War. So
yeah,
it's not generally thought of as the most hilarious topic, and they had very serious moments. They really got
yeah.
to some really serious humanity. And this is actually one of the things we talked about on one of the other podcasts is you just because you're doing comedy doesn't mean that there is a void of any serious topic matter, any subject matter is not it's not vapid, just to be comedy. You can
Yeah,
talk about
yeah.
something serious and still have a funny release or a punchline or something like that to kind of lighten the mood. I wonder though if this is a good thing. I mean, I think that if you live in a society where there is no court jester, it's got to be very tense. The court jester has a very important role to play in society because they have the ability to check the king basically, or queen, what have you, but they make the king or queen seem human and not all encompassing totalitarian. So I think
Mm.
that might be I don't know. This is actually very interesting, and it actually reminds me of a project that you were telling me that you worked on, where you went to China and you worked on a comedy there. And I imagine, in my mind, comedy is very different there than it would be here.
Oh yeah.
And I don't
Well,
know
they
what
didn't want
year that
anything to
was.
be. They didn't want old people to be sarcastic
Hmm.
or crass or crude. Which is a lot of our comedy about old people is based on that because of the incongruity of an old person saying something very crass. Uh, is one source of jokes. It seems that
Sure.
with old people, they do more of that than anything. They don't
Hmm.
do very thoughtful old people for the most part. They do
Yeah, that's actually
crass
certainly
and
true.
silly old people. But I was thinking about what might be going on. There's a number of things. One is people are taking themselves more seriously,
Hmm.
so they don't like to spend the time just laughing because they think that laughter is vapid,
Hmm.
that comedies are kind of silly and don't have anything to say.
Mm-hmm.
And that's totally wrong about good comedies.
Right.
So, but maybe it's getting rid of all the really bad comedies, which were just silliness. You know, trying to get a mule up the stairs in your living room because you didn't think to take it out the back door.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, who needs that kind of silliness? But like you said, MASH was about the Korean War, and it had a lot of laughs,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it was very serious for the most part.
Yeah. Had a serious
Um,
undertone for sure. I mean, there was definitely, they really paid attention to the drama slash trauma of the life and death moment that was occurring at any time. When they're making a martini, they have the perfect martini. Now they have to jump right into the ER and,
yeah,
help some servicemen and women, and it actually,
yeah,
you make a good point. And it, three things came to mind. So, Cloris Leachman's character on Raising Hope, she was an elderly woman that seemed to say the weird zany stuff. She didn't
yeah,
really have like, she occasionally had the insight of wisdom that would come with age, but a lot of it was the unusual stuff. That came to mind. And then, speaking of comedy versus something serious, there's Charlie Chaplin's a perfect example in The Great Dictator, of making something funny but also being serious, and then
yeah,
it also reminded me of Frank Capra after he came back from World War II. After he was filming in World War II, he said he was never going to do any more comedies. And so,
yeah,
there does seem to be something where there are times in life where even if you are a comedian or a comedy connoisseur or a fan, that you're not always going to laugh in every moment. But I think the thing about humanity that really ties people together, and if you've ever seen Death at a Funeral with what's his name, the guy that would play Tyrion in Game of Thrones, I can't remember his name right now. um,
I didn't
anyway,
see that, so I don't know.
I'll remember his name in a little bit.
Yeah,
And he goes, he's a little person. I don't know what the
hmm,
correct, God forbid,
no, little person's right.
that's right now, but I'll probably get sued in
Oh
10
yeah,
years.
yeah, yeah,
You know what I mean? But I forget his name, and I love that actor. He was really great in The Station Agent, and he
yeah,
was,
yeah. He's a good actor. Yeah,
yeah. And anyway, so the point I was making about the humanity of things is sometimes in these really heightened moments of deep pain and suffering, it's okay to laugh. Not that you're
no,
diminishing the subject matter, it's that you're recognizing the fragility of life itself, and that it's that's
yeah.
okay. The great comedy, like what was the the philosopher, isn't it? Is it Descartes or the Comedy of Errors? I forget who that is right now. Anyway,
Uh,
so those are the things that made me think of just when you were saying that, about
yeah. Well,
elderly
because
people.
I think, yeah, elderly people, you usually think of them as being quiet or loud or, but not necessarily silly and crass.
Yeah.
But silly and crass give you an incongruity, which is one of the sources of comedy. You know, is
Right.
incongruity
Yeah, certainly.
often gets a laugh. So I think old people are just portrayed as kind of silly things. So when I
Mm.
was in when I was in China, they just wanted the old people to just say straight lines, and I went, well, your old person's not funny anymore. And they said, well, we don't want the old person to look foolish. I mean, well, gosh, there's nothing funny about this old character the way we're doing it now. And then they said, well, that's your problem. Make it funny. And I said, well, every time I make it funny, you don't like the way it portrays the Chinese people.
Yeah.
They said, well, then fix that. And I'm like, okay, I don't know how to fix that. When everything I have them say is funny, you think is either crass or disrespectful or silly. So I just had to drop the old person. I couldn't do anything with the old person. And then with the younger people, they wanted to be respectful to the older people. And they didn't like a lot of arguing because they feel that was not the way they want to portray the Chinese people. And so I had this comedy that had no jokes in it, nothing. It just
Yeah.
couldn't be funny at all. Every time somebody be kind of cute and humorous, okay, that works. That's good. They'd approve that. And I go, but that's not funny. That's just cute and humorous. Cute is kind of annoying to me, actually. I'd rather go straight than cute funny.
Yeah.
Um, it was a disaster in China, disaster. And what I'm thinking too is I'm trying to figure all the reasons that NBC would not have a comedy. Another reason is there aren't very many good comedy writers anymore who are being hired because the older comedy writers who are funny, the networks don't want because they're too old. Though they like to say it's age, but it is age. They think they're not current. And the younger ones are very, very serious, and maybe it's because it's a serious time. I mean, some people would say if you were at a, it's two different groups of people. Some people, if you were at a funeral and somebody made a joke, that other people would reprimand them for making the joke, and some others would appreciate that they took some of the pressure off of the sadness of the moment. So, gosh, it's hard. So I'm thinking there aren't many people who can write comedy anymore, which is why it's a good time to start writing, because at some point they're going to realize, wow, when our major networks don't even have a comedy because nobody can write it anymore, we better figure out how to get some of these funny people back on, on our networks.
Yeah. I wonder how long it's going to last. That's, like this is the first season in 50 years. I wonder, it'll actually be like kind of a test of this model, right? Because if their ratings aren't doing well, and SNL, I guess, apparently has the lowest ratings it's ever had.
Yeah.
And that's an NBC staple. If SNL and I have a theory as to why that is, but I can get to that in a little bit. But if there is no comedy, and like you said, it's been a staple for decades and decades. As far as television, as long as television has been around, there's been comedies. It's that thing that you watch in the evenings before you go to bed or whatnot, or watch with the family. It's a safe family show. If their ratings aren't doing well now and they get rid of comedy, is that going to boost their ratings, or are people just going to completely tune out altogether? Because it's either drama and news. There's nothing to alleviate your day.
Are we like
night.
seeing the beginning of this movement where people are going to take themselves too seriously? And I don't mean that people should be silly and frivolous about their entertainment, but gosh, did you see the movies that were nominated this year for Oscars? They were all depressing.
I didn't actually. I
Yeah,
didn't watch any of those.
Bill Maher actually did a presentation on his show where he just covered all the shows that were nominated. Every single one was a depressing, very hard topic. And what happened? I mean, we're going through a period where people still laugh. I hang out with people who laugh. People still need comedy. But what I was thinking, if I'm trying to think from my own perspective, if I were in a really dark, depressed mood, somebody said, "Oh, well, we're going to turn on. You need to watch The Big Bang Theory or The Good Wife." Both shows canceled, but that's why I'm mentioning them. I wouldn't want to watch The Big Bang Theory because it is kind of silly to me. It always has been, and I think I'm not in the mood to be silly.
Still a lot of sexual innuendo. It's still like that kind of almost lowbrow.
Yeah,
it's actually very interesting you bring up The Big Bang Theory because it's supposed to be heightened intellectuals, but the comedy is still based lowbrow comedy.
Very low.
That's you've seen specifically and worked on many shows that have a range of comedy, but the shows you've worked on have been some of the more intellectual comedies, or even if the delivery is not always intellectual, there's a theme there that definitely is thoughtful, very thoughtful. And I don't know if it's good as a person to take yourself too seriously. That never seems to go over well if somebody takes themselves so seriously. And as a society, that can't be any better. I mean, if you have a bunch of people whose egos are so fragile that they can't take any hits whatsoever. And, where, I mean, where's that? Is it the
But
point
you know
to
what?
make people feel bad?
That's what we talked about this before. I'm not sure if we talked about it in a podcast, but that when Cheers was in its heyday, Sam Malone was a character that could not be presented today on television.
Right.
And so that's what you go, wait, you just took one of the most successful half-hour comedies in television, in history of television, was based on a character who's totally unacceptable for TV. So we start eliminating people because we no longer want to laugh at people who are doing wrong things. We were laughing at the wrongness, not
Yes.
our approval of the wrong things they
Right.
were doing, but at their stupidity in doing those wrong things.
Yeah.
But that's kind of gone because people have told me very clearly Sam Malone as a womanizer
Right.
would not be approved by any network. And
Exactly.
so what's happening now is maybe all the networks can't get anything approved that's funny. And then consequently, they don't have any funny stuff to put on. It's not that they made a decision to say we should go with all drama. It's because they can't get anything funny because they've taken away. I think like political correctness is very hurtful.
Sure.
I
Absolutely.
think that certain amounts are necessary. You don't want to use derogatory terms to describe people that are hurtful terms.
Right.
But does that mean all your characters have to be good, clean spoken, nice people? In which case, there's no conflict anymore, and there's no, I don't want to say silliness, but there's just no laughing at things that hurt us. The comedy, when I was doing comedy, stand-up in particular, most of the successful comics told kind of painful things from their lives that they were able to laugh at. Because it's like thumbing, your nose at these bad things.
Yeah.
You're not approving of them.
Exactly.
You're making fun of them. You're being derisive about them.
Right.
People seem to lost that ability to make that distinction. This political correctness movement where everybody has to always say the correct thing.
That's very robotic. That's unnatural in a way.
Yeah. And I think it might be hurting so that I think there are fewer potential comedies, so there are going to be fewer on the air. And it doesn't seem to affect dramas. How come in dramas they can say those things?
In drama, you can have you can have 27 seasons of sexually violent crimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's supposed to be like, okay, but you don't get a relief from that at all. And you actually touched on a very important element of comedy. It's not just, yes, there's meanness in comedy, and that part probably is the thing that people want to protect against, right? Like, you don't want to just belittle people or pick on the little guy or marginalize people who are already marginalized. That speaks to the wrongness of certain elements of comedy. But with Sam Malone, for example, yeah, he's a womanizer, but you're not saying go Sam, you know what I mean? You're laughing. That's when you're laughing at him as a character.
Yes, you're laughing at him. You're laughing at his deficiencies. His deficiencies are so wrong that you're laughing at the wrongness in a way that you're making fun of that bad stuff. You're being derisive about those things. You're being satirical. And that's all kind of slipping away because it's hard to be satirical when you can't say certain words. You can't say the R word. Well, I didn't even know what the R word. Last time I heard a news report where somebody said, "Well, so and so said the R word, and consequently there was an uproar." I had no idea what the R word was.
Yeah. And I'll let people know right now, it's rainbow. You can't say rainbow. You can't talk about rainbows. It's controversial, and we'll probably get canceled for even bringing it up. But I just wanted to put it out there so people know about it. You know what, though? That brings up a very interesting point, too, is, not already satirizing those circumstances. But here's the thing this is actually the R word you can't talk about, really. And this goes to that point, is redemption. You can't have redemption. Like Sam, he redeems himself from those womanizing behaviors as he grows as a character, and you're laughing at his womanizing behavior. So when he redeems himself, you accept it because you see the growth of a character, the growth of a human. Now we don't have redemption in our society right now. We have cancel culture at the drop of a dime. No one's worth saving, and everybody gets thrown off the side of the ship and just left asunder to sink in the sea of shame and misery. You know what I mean? We don't
Yeah.
have any kind of redemption going on anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's less forgiveness too.
Yes.
It seems like
In the
somebody does
tolerant
something
culture that
wrong,
we're
like
in.
I'm trying to think. There was something recently that somebody did that was wrong. I can't remember what it was, and that nobody would forgive that person.
But it happens a lot. You got
I
Louis
can't remember what it was.
C.K. or
Yeah, yeah.
especially with comedians. And I personally think that comedy is not only on the forefront of free speech. If comedy is killed like it's being killed here, what does that say about free speech? Because you can't live in a society that champions free speech if people can't use free speech. You don't have to like what someone says. And the famous quote is, I don't have to agree with I'm paraphrasing. I don't have to agree with what somebody says, but I'll fight to the death that they can say it.
Yeah, yeah,
That's a
yeah.
free speech society. And this is
And
actually
that's why
kind of
you have to
scary.
be. That's why certain words that you can't say are certain. Like we used to say, and I don't want to defend this at all because terrible is used poorly, but women are sometimes referred to by affectionately as a bitch, my bitch, or
Mm-hmm.
my. And I understand why women object to that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if you saw the guy who said it as a buffoon,
Mm-hmm.
then you're acknowledging also that it's wrong to call a woman a bitch,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time being able to laugh at a guy who just said that instead of saying he can't even say it.
Right.
Then you're not be able to make your point that it's a bad word that you shouldn't say. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's
It's very interesting
gosh,
sign of the times,
it's
you know?
yeah. So maybe this is the beginning of something. Comedies are going to be phasing out. The good thing for those of you who are listening who are interested in being comedy writers is that when it phases out, people are going to miss it. Believe
Mm-hmm.
me, they're going to miss it. And it's going to come back.
Yeah.
And then those of you who are trained to write comedy are going to be ahead of the others. I just don't get these comedies. There was a comedy, um, oh, I can't think of what it's called. I don't want to say specifically anyhow, but I've seen a number of comedies lately in the last 5 years or so that don't really qualify as comedies because they don't make me laugh. They don't make
Mm-hmm.
me feel good.
Mm-hmm.
They just more trouble and and life is shitty, and that's their kind of their theme and their tone. And used to be we made fun of those things, but we didn't embrace them. We made fun of them. I once wrote a line that I won't repeat, but it was about this this Caucasian, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, waspish young woman who dated a Jewish man for the first time in her life, and her
Mm-hmm.
expectations of what the Jewish man would be like.
Yeah.
What was funny is her ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't, and then I got letters from people who said, "How can you say that about a Jewish person?" I said, "I didn't say that. This ignorant white woman said it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it was funny. It was funny because we're saying, look how stupid that ignorant white woman is.
Right.
We're laughing at her stupidity at using those descriptions."
Yeah.
But I got a lot of I got letters saying, well, well, why is your character saying that stuff? Because she's stupid. She's saying it stupidly.
Yeah. There seems to be something that's missing in this woke, tolerant culture that's completely intolerant of anybody else's opinions unless you're a part of this groupthink type of thing. And there's no forgiveness. It's like
Yeah.
you can't claim that as um, you know, your, I don't know what to say, like what kind of phrase, your ride or die philosophy if, you can't also forgive people or understand a deeper meaning. There seems to be, and I've noticed this, in different times, but there's some people out there that have almost zero reading comprehension. They can read the words, they can understand what's being said, but they don't understand subtext at all. They don't seem
Uh,
to put together, um, what's really being said, not just
Yeah.
the words that are being used. People get hung up on words, like
Yeah.
as if the word is the problem.
That's why a lot of people don't understand subtext, but just so for those people who don't use the word, a subtext is what is said without the words that are actually presented. So the
Right.
words may say one thing like, that is a woman comes out, she looks gorgeous, and you say, whoa, that is the ugliest, outfit I ever saw,
Yeah.
as a joke. I mean, just somebody looks beautiful and whatever. What you're saying is not, or you're telling somebody, I'm furious with you. I never want to see you again. And you know from the situation, they're really saying is, you hurt my feelings because I love you so much.
Right.
That's the subtext, the part that's not said with words, but is the obvious meaning of the words that are being said.
Yeah.
And I don't think people are using subtext so much anymore. I think people are just going for the straight dramatic exposition of the points they're trying to make. And
It's like verbal identity politics. It's all surface driven, as if there's no content to any character. It's just what you look like and what I look like, and these differences that we have to mash together. It's like that's
yeah,
not even reality in the closest, and the stripping of our, historical humanity, for not recognizing that there are people on both sides of a divide that feel different ways about a particular topic, like racism or sexism or whatever ism you want to try to, defend or persecute. There is always somebody championing and always somebody, um, you know, trying to abolish that type of behavior or thinking,
yeah.
and a lot of times those people don't get credit, and I'm not here to like really talk too heavily on that type of topic, but this is it's actually a serious thing. You know what I mean? That
It
there's no
is.
comedy. It's like, well, what the fuck
Yeah,
are you
when
thinking?
one network that has not done this in 50 years, not had a comedy. Well, 50 years goes back, uh, probably before I was doing television. So before I was doing television was the last time they didn't have a comedy
That's crazy.
on a network. And
Yeah, what would that? So we're 20 years into, and then so that's 90s, 80s, 70s. Well, 70s, right? That'd be the 70s to now. Yeah, 50 years.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's the last time they. So what was going on in the 70s that they wouldn't have wanted to have comedy? And what happened after that? I mean, it did rebound, obviously. So that's,
yeah.
you can
Well,
say
when
that
I
there's a
was
saving grace
doing
there.
in the height of my career, I did a series for ABC, and it was in the top 10 of the Nielsen ratings. And those days, that was a big deal. It was in the top 10 of Nielsen ratings and got canceled.
Mm-hmm.
And we said, why'd you get canceled? We're in the top 10 of the Nielsen's.
Yeah.
Ooh, I just moved the camera again.
Oh, you're good.
Uh, so the head of the network, the president of the network, president of development said, well, we just don't believe in comedy anymore. He actually said that to me. He said, we're going to go with
We don't
our
believe in
dramas,
it anymore.
and
That's funny.
and we've canceled every comedy. And this was ABC.
Mm-hmm.
We canceled every comedy except one. And he didn't tell me why he didn't cancel that one comedy. Later on, I discovered it was one that he had developed personally.
Oh, okay.
But it was called Who's the Boss?
That's the one he didn't cancel?
Yeah.
That was not like a laugh out loud comedy.
No, it wasn't a laugh out loud, and it wasn't very smart, but it
Yeah.
was very successful. One of the reasons it was so successful is because it was the only comedy left on the network.
Oh,
And
that's kind of a cheat right there.
yeah, so
Yeah.
did he do that to make his mediocre comedy a huge hit?
Could
Uh,
be. It's actually memorable. You know what I mean? I remember, and like Alyssa Milano, she's very
yeah.
present in today's political discussions a lot.
And Tony
So
Danza was in
Tony
it. He was the
Danza,
star of
who
it.
you've worked with
And
before.
yeah, and the amazing thing about it was they said the new comedy is action dramas with humorous attitudes, which this goes way back. And they're saying like the A Team. I don't know if you remember the A
Oh
Team.
yeah, I used to love the
It
A-Team.
was okay. They're a bunch of kind of goofy guys who accomplished like Mission Impossible
I didn't think of it as a comedy
feats.
though. I thought of it as like
Yeah,
an action
but that's
adventure,
what.
like The Fall Guy or something like that.
But Lou Ehrlich, who was president of ABC, said this is the new comedy for the future. It's going to be action shows with characters who are funny in the characters they are. So there were no funny jokes, there were no funny lines, there were no funny situations. There was just these guys with wisecrack and were kind of quirky. Mr. T was a quirky guy who
The
was
tough guy,
outrageous, and yeah,
the no
and so they
nonsense
were all
guy,
just, and it
face
was
and
not a comedy, and it wasn't even a very good show. But
yeah.
he said that was the future of television. Well, what happened then was his show, Who's the Boss, became a huge hit because it was the only comedy left on the air on his network. And in the meantime, it caused other shows on other networks that were comedies to go through the roof. And ABC, when Lou Ehrlich took over, was the #1 network at that time. He made his decision that all comedy was dead and canceled it all. And in one season, went from the top network to the bottom network to the
Oh, so we'll track. I
third or
mean, maybe
fourth.
that's the thing. We'll track
So,
NBC and see what
yeah, see
happens.
what happens. He destroyed ABC by taking out all their comedy. And then the shows that did the best were the ones that had the most comedy. Like I guess that was a time when Cheers started going really strong, and there were a couple others that took off. But mainly, I think of Who's the Boss, because although I like Tony Danza and I think he's a talented guy, I didn't think much of the show, frankly. I mean, that could come back and bite me, but that's okay. But it became a huge hit because it was the only comedy on ABC.
I actually think it's very ironic, though, just for you in particular, is that your career started with writing a script that was based on, Tony Danza's character in Taxi. And that almost didn't happen because you tried to alter it a little bit. And then, you're doing a show, you're running stuff, you're doing series and stuff like that. And then they switch to a show that has the same actor. And that's the thing that like brings, it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. That's pretty fascinating just in terms of, the way the wind blows, but
and you know what else happened? The Cosby Show came out and became the monster hit of TV. It became by far
huge.
the biggest hit on TV,
and that gets no laughs right now.
Yeah, oh yeah. I've been pulled up the lineup. The Cheers followed it, and something followed Cheers, which I don't remember, and all of them were huge hits. So people were starving because one network had no comedies except for Who's the Boss, and the others had fewer comedies. That's why Lou Ehrlich decided they were dead, because all the networks were struggling with their comedies. So they're just repeating. It's like people don't learn from history. It's maybe they'll say, well, this is a different time. This doesn't count as history because times are different now. People are much more serious because there's so many terrible things in the world right now. There's a pandemic. So people aren't, seems like people would want to laugh more, but.
I mean, it is serious times. I mean, we do have some pretty amazing struggles, and they've been going on for a few years, almost half a decade at least, but we had comedies during Obama's era, and there was still a lot of craziness happening, and that was 8 years of different struggles happening all the time. I mean, we had Sandy Hook and the Boston bombing and all kinds of terrible events that happened, but they didn't cancel comedy. Actually the thing that you said though earlier is going to prove probably true again, is that for anybody thinking, oh, this is the end of comedy writing, it's like, no, there's going to be a glut. And there's going to be a resurgence because we need comedy as human beings. And comedian, like stand-up comedian podcasts, which are primarily the podcast I watch, they're doing great. They're doing fantastic right now, And,
but you know what, also if you think about what you would say as a joke in private is different than the jokes you can say on the screen anymore.
Right.
Now, there was a time when they weren't that different. You could kind of say in a private room, except for maybe the expletives, the profanities, pretty much the same thing in private that you would say on screen. But now on screen, you just got to be so careful. And I may be wrong about this. You know, I'm not a person who studies the demographics and such, but it just seems like we're just being wrongly ultra serious now,
Yeah,
and we have really important issues. Lives Matter is very important.
sure.
You know, we've had some terrible deaths in the last several months in
Hmm.
that arena.
Hmm.
We've also had right now in Israel and in the Palestinians they're killing each other or
Right. Yeah.
destroying each other, and you know, Russia hates us, China hates us.
Hmm.
Where we've gotten to a period where there wasn't so much of that anymore. Things just kind of smoothed out a little bit
Hmm.
after the Berlin Wall came down, and China was making more um, capitalistic kind of changes to their system. Everything
Hmm.
was seemed like maybe it was better, and that's when we were doing more comedy. But gosh, I just hate to think comedy is going to die out because we're just too darn serious. We're just
I
too
don't think it will.
serious.
I honestly think what you were saying earlier is going to be more true. I mean, because Netflix has some really great comedies. You know, what was the I watched the whole all the seasons of every time I think of something, I can't remember the name. I'm terrible with names. But speaking of Ted Danson, it's the one that he's in uh,
Oh,
with Kristen Bell.
oh yeah, yeah. The Good Place.
Oh yeah, I love that. I thought that was great, you know, and
Mm.
I thought that was a fantastic comedy and it had a lot of philosophical angles and, you know, definitely some deep thinking there. And that's maybe why it wouldn't be on network because, you know, religion's a topic that people are pretty touchy about, obviously, you know, that's going on all around the world.
Wait a
But
minute, I thought it was on network. Was it on network?
no, that's Netflix.
Oh, it was Netflix?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's what Matt Schnur, I think that's the writer. He's got another comedy coming out, I think. Or anyway, I'm you know like I'm bad with names, streets, and nouns. Basically, I'm just terrible with nouns. So,
Who needs nouns?
yeah. So especially pronouns, you know. But you know, which is a whole nother thing. That talk about taking yourself too seriously, and people are like announcing to the world their bipolar tendencies by labeling themselves as them, they, you know, like all these like conglomerates of like personalities wrapped into one person. I mean, I'm sure there's
I know,
a
and
college
you
course
know,
out there that can, you know, qualify all that stuff in some kind of reality, but I don't know. I can't keep up.
and you know, that's the thing. Even now, I'm trying not to be politically incorrect
Sure. Yeah.
because we're saying these things, and I feel for them. I feel for people who have problem identifying with their sexuality. It's got to be a
Sure.
terrible thing to have to struggle with when you're struggling with it.
Sure.
Once you've made the decision, it's probably a big relief.
Yeah.
Um, I just don't think that confusing the language by saying they when you really talk in singular is helping anybody. But maybe I'm wrong about that too. I don't know. I think, gosh, it just seems like
That whole
it
like
used to
walking on
be.
eggshells thing is can't be
That's it.
good
It's
for
like
us.
walking on eggshells. That's what I
Yeah.
feel like. We're always afraid of who we're going to offend.
Yeah, we're building a
And
culture of fear, you know, like this can't be healthy. You know, fear and stress and all these things that comedy helps eliminate. Like what makes you know, John McClane such a badass is not that he does all these crazy feats and jumps off the top of the Nakatomi building and smashes through the glass. What that's cool. But what made him a badass is that he could be crawling through, you know, a thing and light a lighter, and he's like, "Yippee ki motherfucker!" Like, you know, there's a sense of
mm,
humor to that character
yeah, yeah,
when he
yeah,
seems like he's almost totally beaten, that he can still laugh in the face of, you know, certain death. That's what makes him cool. You know, I mean, he's a guy that's afraid to fly, but he's a tough cop, you know?
yeah.
So it's like, you know, he's seen the worst of the worst, but he's afraid to fly, but he can still
Yeah,
do
you know,
something with
thinking,
Hans Gruber, you
yeah,
know?
going back to Sam Malone, if Sam Malone every time he flirted with a woman, he always did it in an inappropriate way,
Yeah,
according to today's standards, and
sure.
those standards are correct now. we're correct then too, but people didn't acknowledge that.
Hmm.
But if we were laughing at the woman he was picking up because he duped her, that would be kind of a sick
Hmm.
approach to humor.
Hmm.
But we were always laughing at Sam's lack of moral fiber. We're
Hmm.
laughing. We ridiculed Sam Malone for that, and
Yeah.
in a way, there's a subtext of saying that kind of behavior toward women is very wrong.
Right.
That's why we're laughing at Sam, because we find him laughable in a derisive way, we were mocking him.
And it extends to his crew, you know, like with Norm and all these guys, like
Yeah.
riding his coattails and loving to see this. Norm doesn't have that kind of relationship with his wife. He's been married for whatever X amount of years. And it's through those guys' admiration for his behavior that you also get a sense of like, well, these guys are they're kind of losers, you know what I mean? So
Uh
like,
huh.
you know, like obviously this is not the right way to go, you know, and it worked for Sam, but again, he had redemptive moments, you know, where it's like, and then he was challenged by Diane and then later Rebecca, two women that were very strong-willed, you know. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
that juxtaposition of like, well, yeah, you can hit on any girl that seems like a bimbo is what they, you know, would call her in that day. Now, I don't know if that term is, you know, passe or whatever, faux pas at this point, but, you know, when he was challenged by a woman, he couldn't rely on those old, you know, boyish charm, you know, that playboy charm that he had. So he had to elevate himself, but he can't elevate himself in a vacuum, you know. So you need that conflict. If you don't have conflict, then first of all, your stories are going to be crap, you know what I mean? There's no
Yeah.
conflict, there's no story, you know. So we need
Well,
conflict
that's
to a
why the
large degree.
drama is easy, because it's easier to create conflict and drama, because you can just lay it right out there. You can
Hmm.
just have people just argue with each other. With a comedy, if they're arguing with each other, you have to be laughing at the same time. It has to be funny. So it's a
Right.
little different. But that's where people start looking at those comedies and say, well, that's just silly. You know, they're just being silly. Um, I don't know. I don't know. It's interesting that NBC didn't have one comedy good enough to put on the air.
But they still do they still have late night? I didn't look, but I wonder, do they still have late night? Because that's not funny. Most of that stuff is hard to watch, I think.
Yeah, I
You know,
know.
it's just, you know, political. It became politically charged. That's the other thing about television and movies over the last few years. Everything has a political angle. Even if you watch Knives Out, there's some type of political angle involved in that movie. Now, I thought the movie was great. I thought Daniel Craig was a fantastic. His southern accent was probably one of the best I've heard in a long time, and I know because I grew up in the southern reality, maybe not Georgia or Virginia or something like that, but I'm used to hearing those accents. So, but then they had, you know, an angle about immigrants and stuff like that, and it's not that I don't have a problem with that being a part of it if that was in any other era, maybe. But because it's in this era, it just seems very politically charged. And I still like the movie. I think Jamie Lee Curtis was great. I mean, I thought the movie was great, but and they have a sequel coming out, which is going to be interesting. But I don't know. You know, it's very fascinating. It's going back to even like using Cheers as our, you know, barometer for what's going on in today's society. You know, you often said in terms of writing a comedy, you have the four tropes or the four styles of characters. You have the smart person, the dumb person, which, you know, probably have to be relabeled or whatever, the good
Yeah,
looking
yeah.
person, and the mean person. So, like with Carla,
Mhm.
for example, I mean, now we're just going to have the dumb person and the good looking person, and maybe just the good looking people. That'd be a show, just good looking people. I mean, that's what, you know, Housewives is all about. But,
Yeah.
you know, a show like with Carla maybe wouldn't exist anymore. You know, she can't
No, because
exist in this world.
she made a lot of derogatory remarks about people
And she's one of my
that,
favorite characters.
yeah,
She is
that
hella
bordered
funny.
on. I remember some jokes made on Taxi going way back, where somebody made a joke about Alex having a big nose
Yeah.
as a
Which is what,
reference
a
to
Jewish
his
reference, right?
Jewishness.
Yeah.
And the person who
Like the
made
French
that
don't have big
remark,
noses, you know?
the what?
Like the French don't have big noses, you
Oh,
know?
yeah. But that particular joke, I remember when that was done, it offended me then.
Oh,
And
okay,
I
yeah.
thought, so it's like,
But you survived.
but I survived because the character who was saying it was a disgusting person. That's what they would say.
Yeah. And
They
that's the
would
thing; those people are
do
still going to
that.
say that stuff. You know what I mean? Just
Yeah.
because in political social media and television, the media aspect of our lives is not the only aspect of our lives. If you go to Walmart or some other place and you run across somebody who has some choice words to say, they're not going to check social media first to see if they're going to get canceled for saying what. And then where are people going to be? They're not
Yeah.
going to be equipped to handle it at all. We're kind of running like there's a softness that's happening. And I used to, like football has changed, so much. When I was a kid, I used to love to see them play football in the snow and be bleeding. Like that was the coolest thing, I thought. You know what I mean? And now it's, I mean, they're ultra athletes at this point, but that kind of stuff doesn't really exist anymore. And I used to
Yeah.
love
But
watching the
the
Bears
truth
and stuff.
is, some transitions like, okay, football causes physical injury to people
Sure.
that
Yeah.
lasts a lifetime.
Sure.
Well, then why don't we just, instead of making football softer, why don't we just
Get
get
rid of
rid
it.
of it?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. If it's really
Yeah.
hurting people, if
Hmm.
it's really causing damage, are we doing enough when we're just saying, okay, we'll accept some damage. We'll still accept the damage and people having brain injuries and all these things because we love football so much, but we'll do less of it. Well, it doesn't even make sense. Is less of a bad thing? Is less of a terrible thing still, is that acceptable because you did less of a terrible thing?
Right.
No, get rid of it if it's a terrible thing.
Yeah, like war. You know what I mean? Like that's a good it war is horrible and football is
Yeah.
like, a little microcosm of what war is, it's these two conflicting sides.
And there's some people say, see, there's a chance we're able to take the human nature, which combative
Hmm.
and violent, and put into a form that minimizes the harm. But these guys who play it are getting a lot of harm.
Yeah,
So is that fair to them that we're using them as our means of protecting
entertainment.
ourselves from the violence by
Yeah.
letting them have all the violence? I've seen that in
Hmm.
futuristic novels and movies where the games are just horrifically violent
Hmm.
and uh, mean spirited and terrible. But football is, boxing is, but why
Boxing.
do we allow people to beat themselves until they're a bloody pulp as long as they can still stand? We say, well, because they choose to. They choose
Yeah.
to because you pay them a lot of money for it. Should we be encouraging it? It's all so confusing. So,
Yeah, I feel like that way about UFC because with UFC, there's some serious damage. And I was watching I always appreciated martial arts and everything. And I was watching Joe Rogan, and he's been a commentator on UFC and he's a martial artist, for many, many, many years. And he made the comment about like, it's one thing to watch these guys get damaged in the ring, but what a lot of people don't see is like when they're at home and their ears are ringing for weeks on end, and like, they have real, and it started making me think like, well, yes, I'm contributing to this by watching it for my own entertainment. But
yeah.
and there is the thing where it's like, you do think like, well, they're both agreeing to go into the ring. They've trained for this moment, so they're accepting the responsibility of this moment and what happens during the consequences of these moments. Kind of like Evil Knievel, he was like, I'm man enough to, you know, to accept the responsibility for whatever happens, which is a kind of bravery, you know what I mean, in a way.
Yeah, yeah. So you can say that's the point. You can argue.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about free speech before. You can argue all these points, the pluses, the minuses, the pros, the cons, the yes, the no's. It's very complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, try and simplify it by saying you simply cannot say the R word anymore on
Mm-hmm.
television. Even if you're a news commentator who's telling you something somebody did that was really wrong,
Mm-hmm.
when you refer to it, you refer to it as the R word. And you go, but we're grown-ups. Just say what you're reporting what was said, not you're not saying it. Is it just that sound of that word is so horrific that people will have bad reactions to it?
And I don't think so, because I had to be told that that was a bad word. Like there's other words like the N word. See, the fact that we even have to have this conversation We have to modify our speech to have, so that we're in a safe environment, that we can have this adult conversation is very bizarre. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we
Because you
talked
and I
about,
aren't going to say the, I'm not going to say what
yeah.
the R word or the N word are. Or,
I mean,
I'm not
I
going to say
already
what
said
they
it was
are.
rainbow.
Right? Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
an
Okay, you're
edge
going for
pusher.
rainbow on
Yeah.
the R word. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
I'll push that envelope. I'm not afraid. But, the N word and everything, and all these
yeah.
other words. I mean, what are they going to do? They're going to have a word for every letter of the alphabet, and then we can't say the alphabet. I don't know, like,
Uh,
really where we're going to go with this.
I don't know where it's going to go. It'll work out because it always seems to work out somehow. But I just hate to see comedy ruined because they take out all the conflict
Yeah.
and take out all our required understanding and figuring out who the bad guy is and who the good guy is, who's the antagonist, who's the protagonist, who, when they say the N word, is a disgusting, awful human being, and who, when it's just reporting that somebody said it, is just reporting to somebody else who don't know what was said and feel silly saying that I came to say that sound out loud, even when I'm not saying it in an offensive way.
Yeah, it's about context too. It's about context. You can say the word and it could really mean, this is the thing we were talking about a second ago with subtext. It's like you can say something horrible in a very different way to where it doesn't sound as bad because you're saying it like my wife and I do this thing where like if we get ice cream, and like whoever gets the first bite, like, we always say like, oh, how is it? It's awful. It's so disgusting. Like you just
Yeah,
don't even try it. Don't come near it. And, of course we're shoveling spoonfuls. And that's
yeah.
it's like, I know that there's a joke there. There's a sense of
Right, right.
humor
That
about
is the
that.
joke. The whole joke is the subtext is I don't want to share my ice cream with
Yeah.
you.
And it's
You know?
delicious. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
outstanding.
And that's what's funny about it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And it's not like I want to hear anybody say those words aloud. I don't want to hear those words. They're awful words. They've had terrible meanings and been very hurtful to a lot of people. I just don't want us to be so afraid that we lose our freedom of speech to be artistic, to tell stories, to make people laugh, to make people think, to make people feel. Gosh, sometimes you hear somebody say some disgusting language to somebody else, make you feel more for that poor person who was
Yeah.
spoken of.
And also on
Uh,
the flip, there's people who can delicately say something that's atrocious. They don't say any
yeah,
bad words, they don't have a terrible tone, but their meaning is gross. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And those people, in my mind, are more slippery and more dangerous because they're more subversive. Um, they're less in your face. If you see, like you said, you have the Archie Bunkers or the people who say the Sam Malones, who's a womanizer. When they're doing it out in the open, you can stand back and say, oh, this thing is terrible that this person is doing. And if they have any redeeming qualities about them, when they do have a moment of redemption, you can kind of allow it. But if you have those people who pretend to be nice all the time and really are just terrible and do terrible things and have true acts of racism, bigotry, misogyny, all that kind of stuff, like the BTK killers or something like that. Like, yeah, he's a Boy Scout leader, you know what I mean? He's a deacon of the church. He's helping people look for people, you know what I mean, for his own crimes, you know what I mean? But maybe he never
yeah,
said anything bad. Maybe he never used the R word or the N word, you know what I mean? And it's like
yeah,
there's a scale here that we are kind of missing.
yeah. I don't know what the answer is. I do know that I've been rewriting some of my older scripts lately, and I have been going back and taking things out. And I never have a guy use the word bitch to a woman
Mm-hmm.
just because I find it very offensive
Sure.
personally, so I don't do it. But you could have a terrible guy calling his woman a bitch and this and all that, and have the hero come up and punch him out, and
Yeah.
a lot of people would cheer for that,
Sure.
and
I have
that
less
would
of
be
a problem with bitch
establishing
than
it's
cunt.
wrong. So
Cunt's a word that, like, that one kind of,
nobody,
it's hard. Like, that one's a hard one for me to say. Not because,
yeah.
like, that one's kind of is an arresting word. But people in Australia say it like, like they're ordering eggs, like
Oh,
it
they
just,
do.
yeah,
It's a very
it just
common
rolls
word.
off the tongue. Yeah,
Oh, really?
it's
Isn't that
a
funny?
cultural
Yeah,
thing.
again, it matters. It's all where you come from. Yeah, if I hear somebody say those kinds of words in mixed company,
Yeah.
It makes me uncomfortable.
Sure.
If I see it in a movie, I'm not uncomfortable because I know it has a point, or it wouldn't be there unless it's a bad movie, of course. But
And that brings up another point. Like as our culture starts to get further and further away from that word in the vernacular of the common people, Tarantino writes that word almost, like there are certain things where he writes it in constantly. And you're like, okay,
yeah,
why is it that you're allowed to get away with this? Is that
I
because
don't
you have
know.
Samuel L. Jackson as one of your main characters, but the character he's playing is a despicable person? So,
Yeah,
there's not a
mm,
real clear cut answer to, some of these topics that we're discussing. And that's okay. I mean, you don't always have to, there's not always going to be a definitive point where we say this is it, and there's no further discussion on this. And that's the part about free speech. I don't have to
yeah,
like that you're saying it, but I don't, if you're not allowed to speak your mind, right or wrong, is that better? For me to have that subtle control over someone else, that seems almost abusive in its own right to me.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, I wish I could think of somebody just recently, maybe it'll come to mind. Somebody just recently said something inappropriate on the air and apologized for it and still lost his job, and I can't think of who it was. But what if you really regret what you said
I'm
and
sure
you
that
say, I
happens.
really do regret it?
If you've ever been in an
This,
argument with your spouse, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like
you'll
there's a
say things you regret. Yeah,
yeah, and then you really feel bad. Like, wow.
yeah,
And then the next time you don't say those things, you know what I mean? And you don't carry that forward, and you learn from that. That's the thing about the R word that we're not allowed to talk about anymore is redemption. You have to, and that's the thing that Keats talked about a lot when we would analyze other people's stories, is like some people don't have any redeeming value. And we'll allow a Walter White who will murder his co-conspirator's girlfriend so that he can keep him locked in this meth world that he's in. And you'll
yeah,
still think, oh, that's a cool guy because he says I'm the one that knocks. You know what I mean? It's like, well, wait up a second. Or Tony Soprano, when you first saw him kill someone, they're murderers. You know what I mean? They are murderers
yeah.
for
And there
their
were
own
people,
good, for their own gain.
yes, absolutely. And for some reason, people just loved those characters. I couldn't watch, and I'm again exposing things about me that some people say, "Oh, well, he's not an artist." But
Mm,
I didn't like The Sopranos because our protagonist was a ruthless, cold-hearted killer,
right.
and I couldn't get past that to enjoy when he was being funny and charming. I couldn't do it. I couldn't
Hmm.
make that transition. That's just me. I'm sure there are people who felt like I did, but most people said, "Oh, what a funny, interesting, complex guy he is. What a delight and interesting thing to watch." And
Yeah.
no, not to me, but it was to most people.
I mean, I
So it's again
certainly
a
enjoyed
fine
The
line.
Sopranos. I thought it was a great show. And it's not because I didn't revel in his depravity, you know what I mean? But he does have a charisma about him. He had a
He
charm about
does,
him. And to
but
watch
isn't it,
him
that's kind of
navigate these
yeah.
worlds is very fascinating. But
And
Lorraine
that would
Bracco's
be
character,
yeah, yeah.
she
Go
cut him off
ahead.
because he's a narcissist. And then when she
Yeah,
realized, like, oh, he's a narcissist who enjoys talking about himself in therapy, that's when the show changed completely. And it wasn't really a jump the shark moment, but
yeah,
it's when you realize, oh, this character's not redeemable. And then, so when he went further and then he had that final conclusion, which I still think about that moment, that final moment of like, wow, what a powerful moment in television. Because we were talking about finales and stuff. I
yeah,
think it was last show. Yeah, it's very interesting, but yeah, he's a complicated person. He's a complicated
yeah.
character.
Yeah, and remember the last show when we told everybody the key to happiness? Yeah, we've made that pretty clear, but I guess they'll have to watch that show to.
Yeah, I would like to like cue them in a little bit, but I'm not
Yeah, I'd
gonna
like to
do
tell
that.
them more about it, but I just don't want to. I don't want to hammer it over
I
the
mean, we
head,
did tell
So
them more. It's just, they need to
yeah,
go back and watch that.
gotta go back and see what the key to happiness is.
And it's to their
Um,
benefit.
but I understood The Sopranos. I mean, I understood why it was a hit. It was well written. It was well acted. It was clever. but I did have a problem with being enamored of
Hmm.
this character who was so despicable. What a
Yeah.
despicable man he was. And yet, that was part of the fun of it, maybe, is seeing how life is so complex that somebody could be so awful, could be so kind and sweet to his daughter, for example.
Yeah.
That was kind of interesting to look at, but I couldn't root for him. I could never root for Tony
Hmm.
in any phase of his life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
But
I
we're
don't
going to
know.
have Walter White characters. You know, they're going to write these characters. If they're not going to do comedy, then what are they go? What's the pull? I mean, you got to have a Breaking Bad type of character, or you know what I mean? Like, what is it? It's either I don't really know what the NBC lineup is right now in terms of drama, but you know, it's either that or the news. You know, and the news is pretty depressing. So
Oh, the news is awful. The news makes me depressed.
yeah,
The news talk shows depress me. I still like Bill Maher because he tends to find what's funny about the horrible things. And it's very clear when he's making a joke that the joke is a joke at the expense of the bad guy.
hmm, yeah. He's
And
a little
that is,
sanctimonious for me, I think, at this point. Like I used to really like Bill Maher.
yeah,
And once he did Religulous, I think it was. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Um, and I'm not like super religious or anything like that, but I've always had a problem with insulting people because of their beliefs. I'm not a big
yeah,
fan of that. I always
yeah,
thought that religion is largely regional. It just depends on what group of people you grew up around. That's usually your biggest influence for religion. And I don't think anything's wrong with that. And I don't think anything's wrong with hearing an uplifting message. I think people misconstrue the idea of religion, which has ugly attachments, you know, human attachments to it. I think that, um, you know, to basically lambast the whole thing and not see any positives and what it can do for people in times of struggle and times of need, because you personally don't agree with it, I think that's really short-sighted. That's my own personal opinion, you know, and he's probably smarter than me, so he could argue against me and people would be swayed by it. But me personally, I just found that kind of crass. Like, and I've kind of shelved him a little bit since that
mm,
particular show that he made. And that's just
mm,
me. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have any interest in making people feel bad for, you know, the whole idea of like having religious freedom is very, I guess, important to me. And I don't really care what religion it is. It's just that you're allowed to express your inner, as long as you're not oppressing someone
yeah.
else. You know
No,
what I
that's
mean?
the same thing. So the religious freedom and freedom of speech,
Hmm.
both are similar in that they're wonderful ideal, but they still have to have limitations. Like freedom of speech, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater because you'll cause panic and people will get hurt.
Yeah.
Um,
I think you can actually do that if there is a fire. You can't say it
oh,
if there is no fire. That's what I
yeah,
think it is. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. In fact, if there is a fire,
Then you're warning people and you're a
yelling
hero.
piano wire won't help
Yeah,
anybody. You know, it's
exactly. Yeah.
got
I'm a nice guy. You know what I mean? That
yeah,
doesn't, what does that do to
yeah.
anybody? Yeah.
Love y'all, love
Yeah.
y'all.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what I mean?
And why is he running out the door telling us he loves us all? I don't
I
know.
voted, you know, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like none of that's going to really help.
But the problem is you just have to have freedom of religion and freedom of speech, you have to have some responsibility. And that responsibility is the hard thing to measure. When is it irresponsible? When is it responsible when you're saying critical things about a religion or about uh, some people or persons? If you really believe in it, gosh, it's just so hard. It's so hard.
And this is exactly why comedy exists. You know what I mean? So that you can talk about this. You can watch a half hour of this where it gets fixed in half an hour. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. They
And you
don't
know, we
even
used to
top, they don't
play.
breach these subjects in comedies anyway.
No. And I keep going back to Cheers because I found the characters were so interesting because you could, so Sam, you probably couldn't do Coach or Woody either because Coach was so stupid that we were laughing at a lot of his stupidity, a
Hmm.
lot of his misunderstanding.
He was
Now, in
almost
that
our word.
case,
You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
It was pretty close.
he was close, but he he got laughs with his stupidity. So you weren't laughing. You what were you laughing at then? You were laughing at his misunderstanding. You were laughing at his confusion. Some people were laughing because they feel like they're better than he is. You know, they
Yeah.
feel superior to him. That's all bad stuff.
That's the superiority complex is really the more damaging um, perspective, is that you're superior to everyone. And that's actually
Yeah,
what made Frasier funny. You know, is because he had kind of a pomposity about him, a little bit of superiority because he was highly intelligent and he knew a lot. But then it would
yeah.
also, you know, it would kind of fall apart for him sometimes, you know what I mean? And so that would be the thing where that's his redemption is, you know, whatever it is that can kind of make you seem human.
You know, I always had a problem whenever I have a and stupid characters, or they call them dumb characters. I always hate the word dumb because dumb used to mean you couldn't speak,
Hmm.
and
Yeah, right. They've
they've used that
subverted the
word
words. Yeah.
wrongly to because
Hmm.
they used to call people dumb because they couldn't speak and confuse the whole meaning. I still call people who are not able to think well. Sometimes I call them stupid
Hmm.
rather than dumb. But stupid people, when you laugh at them, there is no justification. There's no way around the fact that you are not laughing, ridiculing stupidity. You're really laughing at their stupidity. And maybe by laughing at their stupidity, you are laughing and ridiculing stupidity rather than them. I don't know. But it's really tricky. So, what I do whenever I have a stupid character, I make sure that that character is happy or well adjusted or actually maybe makes better choices in the long run than the
Hmm.
so-called not stupid people do. And in that way, I give that person some,
You're not
some,
pitying them, you know?
yeah, I'm not pitying them,
Hmm.
but I've still always had a problem with stupid jokes and stupid characters that we laugh at because you're laughing at their stupidity. You are, but then you could. Somebody would argue, we're laughing at stupidity, not theirs.
Hmm. But you know, you bring up Coach, and that's an interesting thing because not only did we give away the keys of happiness to check out the last episode, but we also talked about the fact that the Coach's daughter, which is one of my favorite episodes of, you know, not only your writing but just in television. I love that episode. So yeah, we can laugh at his stupidity. You know, he's punch drunk. You know, and we can laugh at his misunderstandings of common things. But what he had that other people lacked is a real heart, you know, and a
Yes,
depth of
yes,
understanding about true beauty, you know, and that is something that stupid people cannot get, you know. So he's not stupid.
yeah.
It's just
No,
that he misunderstands because he's a little punch drunk.
yeah, yeah, that's true. God, it's tricky. Comedy is tricky, so you can't
And
then
it always
just,
evolves. Yeah, it
yeah, so you
evolves.
can't just exclude it. You can't just say, look, don't say bitch ever again in a comedy line because
Hmm.
it's offensive to women.
Hmm.
There might be a time where paying bitch in a comedy that makes you laugh will actually support the women's feeling that bitch is a terrible word to say. So
Yeah.
you just can't. You just got to kind of feel your way through. And well, that's one thing students sometimes say. Well, how tell me how to be funny? Tell me how to write a joke. And I can
Hmm.
tell you about surprise and mislead and the rule of three and all those little devices we use and things to make jokes. But ultimately you have to have some judgment
Hmm.
about what the subtext is or what the bigger ramification of what this moment says. And if you're just having, say, Tony Banta say something that just reveals he's stupid and get a big laugh because it's such a stupid line, I don't think that does anybody any good. And those cheap laughs are in shows all over the place.
Hmm. And you know, actually, interesting thing too is like during 9/11, that was a moment where we didn't have a lot of reason to laugh, I guess it seems. And then Rudy Giuliani was on SNL, speaking of SNL, and he came out and he said, "Is it okay for us to laugh again?" And or you know,
Uh,
Lauren Michaels asked the question to Rudy Giuliani, and he said, "Yeah, you know, why start now?" You know, and then that was the joke, and it kicked off the
uh,
show. you know, and of course, you know, different times, and you know, maybe these people wouldn't share the same space anymore, but it is important. And it also, stupidity is can be, you can be stupid and intelligent, you know, you have to read the room. So you know, like Steve Martin, he had a really funny joke with his stand-up special where he was talking about a gangly wrench. You know what I mean? Like it was plumber's comedy, and it was funny because the general audience does not understand what he's describing. You know what I mean? And he's doing it in such a specific way that's very intelligent for that audience. But when you're reading the room, you're like, it sounds dumb because no one else gets it. You know what I mean? But that's what makes it funny. That was the genius of what he was doing.
Do you remember the movie The Jerk?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Very funny movie, but so offensive, and I don't think today it'd be made.
No.
And maybe it shouldn't have been made. I don't know. He was so, we only laughed because he was so simple-minded, stupid.
Right, right. And
well,
but he also had a genuine humanity about him.
He had a humanity.
Yeah.
So, but we still were laughing at this man with humanity whenever he did something stupid. And there was no redeeming value to our laughing at the stupid thing unless we were saying something that's stupid is funny because its stupidity is, I don't know.
But take something
you gotta
like,
feel your way through it. You have to feel your way through comedy.
Yeah.
You do drama too, but comedy more so. You have to say, is that an offensive joke? Or is that joke? Sometimes I've seen an offensive joke that's just so funny, it makes you laugh so hard that they don't even care that it's offensive.
Yeah, and it just because you laugh at something doesn't mean you don't appreciate the volatility or the conflict of it. You know what I mean? That a laugh is not necessarily a sign of disrespect for the topic. You know, it just is a knee-jerk reaction that helps diffuse. Sometimes it helps you hone in on what the real problem is. You know, when you've laughed it out, it's like, okay, yeah, that was funny. This is what the real problem is. Like there are certain things that, you know, and you know, coming back to the idea of superiority, when you know, Tom Hanks in Forrest Gump, that's a moment where people's attitudes are superior, so they're laughing at him. You know, it's a different kind of understanding of when he says life is like a box of chocolates or whatever, and people think he's simple-minded. Their superiority is laughing at him for that type of, for him expressing himself like that. But because it's such a profound moment, and because he shows such humanity throughout the picture, then you kind of have a different take on it. So a lot of this ego that people are having, and maybe this is partly why they're not doing comedy, is this, it's this superiority complex, as if you understand things so well. And we live in a woke culture that's super tolerant of people, and I say that sarcastically somewhat, that feels like they're hyper superior to anyone's opinion that is not their own. And that's
a good point. Yeah, that is a good point.
You know,
you know what? I'm trying to remember. In the simpler days, my first experience with a censor was on Taxi. And a censor on a script I wrote, Lotka came in with a bag, a little like a lunch paper bag.
Right.
And somebody said, Lotka, what you got in there? And Lotka says, goat droppings. And he was going to use it for some fertilizing a plant or something. I don't remember. The plant he brought from his goat. He brought in goat droppings to help fertilize some plant that wasn't doing well in the garage. The censors came to us and said, you can't say goat droppings. Said,
why?
All the things we worry about, the N word, the R word, this and that, all the really important stuff.
GD is right up there.
You're gonna hit me on goat droppings because I said, what's wrong with goat droppings? He said, well, goat droppings sounds disgusting. It sounds wet and like fecal stuff. I said, well, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And
it's also
but who's thinking those details? I just heard goat droppings because it's a weird thing to bring in a lunch bag. Not thinking a goat dropping is wet and disgusting looking. And so they finally said, well, you don't have to change the joke. You just have to change the goat pellets. Okay, my point is, there was a time we worried about that kind of stuff, and a married couple couldn't share the same bed, and so I guess we're making certain advances.
But they're
Except now we're kind
parallel,
of,
they're lateral advances in a way.
but now we're kind of going. I don't know, because then we were saying things that were not so wrong, but we were looking to find the wrongness in them. We're
Mhm.
kind of doing that again, aren't we?
Yeah,
We're
that's a
kind of
good point.
looking for the wrongness in something that would have just slipped by unnoticed otherwise. And somebody said, well, should it slip by unnoticed because it's wrong?
And that's probably somewhat of a personality conflict where they're in a position of power to impose their own squeamishness about the finite details of a dropping.
Yeah.
You know, so they are
So,
looking, it's their job also to look for things to censor, you know, and that's a very interesting position.
yeah, another one I'm trying to find the lighter side of what we're talking about because we're getting
Sure.
really heavy now. But I was thinking another one was we used to call a bad guy a scumbag.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard people
Yeah, yeah.
call.
I've used that
Well,
word many
yeah,
times.
the network came
Yeah.
back one day and said, I wrote something and they censored it. You can't say scumbag. I said, I've heard scumbag said a million times. Yeah, but those have slipped by. It should not have slipped by. You can't say scumbag.
Hmm.
Then I said, okay, I'm going to show my ignorance here. I'm going to say, can you tell me why scumbag is such an awful word?
Yeah, I'm curious. What was the answer?
Because scumbag is an unused condom. I mean, is a used condom. That was their answer to me.
I have never heard that. I've never
Yeah,
even tied those two together ever in my life.
neither had I. Never had heard it. Never didn't even think. Okay, scum meaning semen, I guess, and a
Yeah,
bag meaning the condom. Oh, okay, I get what it could mean. But who knew that? I mean, we're going to censor the whole country because you happen to know that a scumbag is slang for a used condom.
that actually makes me want to use it more now because now I understand the context. I was just using it without looking it up before. So yeah, that was a good point of
But you can't say
education, I think.
dirt bag because there's nothing. Dirt is not a metaphor. Scum is a metaphor for semen. Why? But dirt is not a metaphor for shit. A
Is it
dirt
an
bag. You'd
acronym?
be
Is
a dirt
SCUM an
bag.
acronym, or is it like S.cum or something like that? Is that
No,
what?
it's spelled regular scum, like pond scum.
Right.
But
That.
apparently, in some areas of New York, they actually did call. Because I talked to somebody who was on the staff who was from New York, said, "Yeah, we do call them scumbags, use condoms." I went,
Wow.
"Oh, so it's really, and what's a scum bucket?" Well, you don't even want to go there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But I didn't know any of that because I didn't think of scum being semen.
You know, like in New York, when I was living in New York, they used to call people like a herb, like you're a herb. I don't know what the insult was, but it was, you know, again, it's context. You don't want to be called a
Yeah.
herb because the way that guy's saying herb does not sound good. It doesn't sound like
Right,
something
right.
that you want to like chop up and put in your meals, you know what I mean, to
Yeah,
enhance the flavor,
you
you know?
know when he says herb.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I never understood the context or the meaning of that word, but I understood the context. I didn't understand the meaning, you know, of like, well, why is that a bad thing? You know, and I never asked. I just was like, oh, don't call me a herb. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
I
how
will
about the
not be
Karens
confused with
now?
basil.
All these poor women who are named Karen, they have
Yeah,
to live with that because
sure.
Karen now is a euphemism, or it's not really a euphemism. It's just a slang for a woman who's obnoxiously
Hmm.
officious and
Hmm.
racist and
Typically
just
white.
all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why Karen? Who came with a Karen? Why? Because that's a very common white name for a woman. I don't know.
I have no, I mean, I know a lot of black Karens actually. I can't say a lot, but I know some Karens. And
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to, like Karen Kirkland, you know, she's a black woman who was, you know, the head of the writing programs for Nickelodeon. And I'm sure she's probably like, well, what
Yeah.
did I do? You know what I mean? How did I get thrown in the mix here? You know,
Yeah. So, gosh, it's so weird. It's so
it is
hard.
bizarre. It's super bizarre. We live in a kind of, you know, upside down world right now. It's,
Yeah.
you know. And I wanted to, when we were talking about Carla and everything, I did want to, we didn't really have a great segue because we were doing such great philosophical work here. We're really doing we're on the
Yeah,
forefront of fighting the good fight for free speech over here.
all this ends up on the floor of the cutting room.
Yeah, the entire podcast.
The whole podcast, yes.
It'll be
Everything we said except for when
just
we said
black.
R word or N word,
Yeah,
that way it can stay. So
just little blips, and then there's black, and then seconds of like us
yeah.
saying
You know what
yes.
I could like I didn't understand this. I'm very uncomfortable referring to myself as a white man.
Hmm.
I find that derogatory.
Hmm.
I'm not any happier with calling myself a Caucasian, but I'd rather call myself a Caucasian, though it's not as. I don't like white and black, white man, black man, brown man. No, it's like an oversimplification. But maybe
Yeah,
that's
it's
okay because it's
identity.
an oversimplification. Maybe that's why it works. But I do remember, and since I'm not black, and I may have this wrong. There was a time when being called a black man was bad,
Yeah,
and you'd rather be called an African American. Though
yeah,
now a lot of people don't want to be called African Americans because they say they're not really from Africa. Maybe their
right.
ancestors were, but
Yeah,
and then you go, now that's a political correctness. It's getting confusing. I don't want to offend any black people. I
yeah.
want to call them what they feel is appropriate, but I don't know what it is because it changes from when I'm rewriting. Last time I rewrote a script, and this time I'm not really sure what the latest politically correct term is. It's also that way with uh, there was a time when you didn't want to call a Jewish person a Jew. That sounds like a bad way. People do it all the time now, and they just say it's okay. But
Also,
uh,
paradoxically, Jewish people were not considered white for the longest time.
yeah,
So to consider yourself a white person as a Jewish, it was like a contradiction in terms. Somebody of a Jewish descent, and that's the thing about Judaism, which is a little bit different than like being called African American or black, is it's not tied to a religion. So there's a separation there that's a little bit different. It's more of an identity moniker rather than a religious affiliation. And so in that sense, there's also a little bit of entanglement that makes it a little bit more complicated. So I
yeah,
don't, I'm not really, I probably don't ride the wave of social construct correct. I mean, I know I don't. I'm not always in step with what's going on socially. I
yeah,
don't. I personally have never been to Africa. I would like to go, but I'm actually a fifth generation American. I mean, my great
yeah,
grandmother was born here in 1907. And her parents, I believe, were born here. My grandfather was born in the South, so, and I'm sure in his generation was removed from possibly slaves. I mean, that's the other thing about being a black person in America, is that if you're a black person in America, you're supposed to assume that your ancestors were slaves, which was not the case. Not every black person in America was a slave. There were people who were brought here and created to be slaves, and then there were people who were emancipated, but there were also people who were black who are here who were from other parts of the world that were
yeah,
not slaves. They were free people. And that's another
right,
part of our history that we kind of seem to ignore. Like the abolitionists, we ignored that there were white people who were adamantly against racial persecution, religious persecution. There's always been people of every race and derivation therein that are not for the persecution that is happening currently. And, I
right,
think that's
right,
good. That's, we live in a world where throughout history, people have said, no, that's not right, and we are living in it still. It just is, it's kind of flipped, and it's kind of a reversal of what it used to be. And that's okay, I mean, but that's no reason to end comedy on NBC. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
I
So
don't
that's
know.
what caused. Now we tie it all back. It was it was slavery in America that has caused NBC to cancel all their comedy programming.
It really could be, because the BLM movement was so pervasive last year. And not that it only came up last year. I mean, it started around like 2015 or whatever. And the idea of like, the whole idea of saying Black Lives Matter before it became a political, I mean, maybe that was the point of saying it, is before it became a political movement. is to just acknowledge that you can't just kill black people because their lives don't matter. And then people automatically got offended when you say every life matters.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
every
yeah,
life does
yeah.
matter, but that's not really the reason they were saying it. And now it's a
Right,
political
right.
thing that, like,
No, I know. And then if
you
you
can
say,
contribute to
if somebody
financially.
says Black Lives Matter and somebody says all lives matter, then you go, come on, you're looking for a fight here.
Yeah,
We're saying Black Lives Matter because yes, all lives matter, and because of that, we overlook sometimes that in that subset of that is that Black Lives
sure.
Matter.
Yeah,
So do Asian lives. So do,
absolutely.
but that's not the point. That's not the point of this that particular statement.
Right now it's Palestinian lives matter, like, and then we'll get back. Eventually, we'll name every group until somebody will say all lives matter, and then they'll be like the hero of the day
Yeah,
for
yeah.
recognizing that all lives do matter. We live in such a weird world.
It's a weird world. I, I just wish everybody would get back past all their prejudices. Then we wouldn't have to worry about this, and comedy would have free reign.
Yeah.
My dream for free comedy when nobody has any prejudice, so that you
And
can
then we
say
can start
anything.
focusing on the real problem, rainbows. And then we can
Yeah,
also focus on not illegal aliens, they can be legal, but anything that's flying around and it's been unidentified, we should definitely all band together and attack that thing.
yeah. Whatever it is, yeah.
Whatever
Tag
it
it,
is. Yeah.
tag it.
So,
Oh yeah, I know, but I really do want to support everybody who is a decent person. Then some people
yeah,
say,
that's the
well,
thing. Being a decent
well,
person,
yeah,
the content of your character, not the way you
yeah,
look or
yeah,
how you
yeah.
cut
And
your
they say, well,
hair.
what about those people who aren't decent because they had a bad upbringing? And then you got to think, and you did to me again. Okay, they're entitled to some extra consideration because they didn't have a chance to be a decent person because they
But
were
they're not
raised so
entitled to
badly.
being indecent to people. They're just entitled of having your empathy and sympathy because their circumstance could cause them to be indecent, but you acknowledge or you hope that they will overcome that. That's the thing, is overcoming these problems. It's like if you're a scumbag, you know, then you're a scumbag. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care what your problem was. You know what I mean? If you're a
Yeah,
terrible person because you were in a terrible environment, yeah, in the court of law, that might get you some leniency. But that doesn't mean that you get to go on committing murders because you were abused as a child. That's not the way it
yeah.
works. You
No, it
know?
isn't. But I think about some people. Some people are born kind,
Yeah, I think so.
and some people are born mean.
Yeah,
And it's in their genes. And so then you go, well, if somebody's born mean and they're being mean, it's hard to blame them too much because they didn't really have a chance to be anything but mean. If it was a genetic thing that's very deep seated, or a environmental thing where they were subjected to some kinds of abuse. So then you kind of want to give leniency even to those people who are scumbags,
yeah.
because maybe somebody made them a scumbag when if they'd had the right parents or the right environment, they might have not been scumbags.
But only when you're sentencing to prison. It's like, do you get, solitary confinement, or are you on block C? That's when you give leniency. If you're going to bring them over to my house, you know what I mean, for a barbecue, I don't have a lot of tolerance for that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
There's a safety concern there. And, like, take Jeffrey Dahmer, for example, like, for all intents purposes, his parents were very nice people. They were very, like,
yeah,
normal people. He just took a left turn and it never came
yeah.
back.
But
So,
you imagine bring somebody and say, look, I'm gonna bring over a couple of my friends. They're both scumbags,
mhm.
but I'm gonna bring them to your party because they need a break.
Yeah.
Say, no, you're not bringing them to my
Yeah.
party. I'm scumbags.
Yeah.
Oh, come
That's,
on, they've had a hard life. I don't care.
yeah. That's
Put
not my
them in
problem.
rehab. I don't want them coming to my house.
Yeah, exactly. It's not my problem. And that's the thing. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of theoretical forgiveness, right? Theoretical forgiveness, not actual forgiveness. Theoretical forgiveness for things that um you wouldn't actually practice yourself. You wouldn't have any practical applications. If you know there's like, I bet you Suge Knight did not get invited to a lot of barbecues. You know what I mean? Because he's a dangerous human being. Like, I liked Suge Knight. He was cool to me. You know what I mean? But it was never like I was like, well, I'm just gonna, like, say whatever I want to the guy. You know what I mean? Like, I was guarded, and
Yeah.
thankful that he didn't take whatever it was out on me. You know what I mean? Like, that's a relief. But I wasn't like inviting him to my graduation or anything, but
Yeah, it's so tough. Who was I talking to? Is it you who said, no, it was somebody else I was talking to, this scumbag that I know, who
yeah.
said, no, who actually said the only thing he believes in is the golden rule: do unto others as have others do unto you,
Yeah.
or some to that effect.
Yeah.
Uh, I guess if people just lived by that, it would change the whole nature of existence for us.
I
But
had a real epiphany about that phrase one time.
what?
Well, I realized that, like, I can do unto others as if I would have them, as I would have them do to me, if I had a choice, but I don't have a choice over their actions. So I have to do what I feel, like you said, there are some people who are nice people. I consider myself to be generally a pretty nice person. I'm pretty decent
Yeah.
to most people, and I try to treat every person equally in the context of, my
Yeah, but
dealings with them.
usually hear what people say behind your back.
Yeah. Oh, I know for sure. I know for sure that happens. You know what I mean? But that doesn't guarantee that that person's going to treat me that way just because I'm
Yeah.
nice to them. You know what I mean?
No, you're right. Treat
You have to
others as you'd like
protect
them to
yourself for
treat
that.
you, but that doesn't mean they will treat you the
Yeah.
way you treated them. So,
And you have to protect against that. You know what I mean? For your own self, for your own self protection. And that's something that, like, and that is kind of like what the woke thing is like, we've had too much of this. There's too much bigotry. There's too much laughing at our expense, elitism, you know what I mean? Marginalizing. So I understand how we got here, but it's a pendulum. We're not going to stay here, and it won't, when we go back the other way, it will be modified to exist in that world. Like Archie Bunker, what made him interesting is his juxtaposition against Meathead, because that's a more liberal mindset versus a antiquated, I guess what you'd say, conservative mindset is how people would paint it. But in Archie Bunker's era, that was, when he was coming up, that was a mindset that was created out of self-preservation, and my imagining of him,
yeah,
So as he starts to evolve to become more like, tolerant of Meathead's viewpoints, then again, he has redeeming qualities. You can redeem him as a character because he has a lovability. He loved his wife. He was protective of his family. He had good qualities that were, escaped most people because of his rough exterior, his, brash bravado, and
right.
that's kind of the thing that comedy helps us analyze, and like, for Good Times, Good Times was funny, but it's also, and I'm talking about Good Times, the TV show, not the construct of who wrote the show and how, whether Black people had this much affiliation and control over the show, just the idea of the show itself. There's a sadness to it. And so they
Mm.
are doing that thing in a moment. That's actually tying it back to our earliest portion of this conversation, is that they're in an environment where you would think they'd have no sense of humor. They'd have no right to laugh. They'd have no
Mm.
right to feel jovial and, um, you know, have any alleviation from the oppression that they're feeling. And that's not how they felt. They didn't allow that. They still made jokes with each other and at each other's expense. And, but we're a tight unit because of that. And I think if we erase that from our, not just television, but society, we're in a dangerous place. And that's going to be
Yeah.
hard to recover from. But I think we will, because I think it's inherently human for us to we have laughter. No other animal really laughs. There's not a lot of other, I think chimpanzees maybe, who are our closest relatives, that
Yeah.
laugh, and hyenas, I guess. Hyenas
Yeah, but
laugh.
they laugh at cheap jokes.
Yeah,
Those.
yeah. They're the Chuck
Yeah,
Lorre
slip on
fans
a
of the world.
banana peel. Watch
Yeah,
this. Slips
yeah,
on a
yeah,
banana peel, cracks
yeah,
them up.
yeah, exactly.
Um,
It's like that saber-toothed lion just got caught in that muck and he's never getting out, and they've been laughing
yeah,
about it ever
yeah, yeah.
since.
Look at that. But it's weird because I pitched an idea to Russian television one time, and they said they didn't like it because it dealt with death.
You
And
to
death,
Russian television?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, there was Russian television wanted to do a remake of Who's the Boss, I think, one of those shows that we were talking about. They
Yeah.
wanted to do a Russian version of Who's the Boss, and they wanted
Wow.
some ideas. And at the
Stalin.
time I
Stalin is
was,
the boss. If
yeah.
that Stalin and Lenin.
So, well, now it's Putin. So,
Yeah, Trotsky or
but,
whatever.
yeah, who's the boss? Starring, yeah. Anyway. So the guy said, well, death isn't funny.
Hmm.
This is, guy, these are Russians talking. I guess, I don't think of as Russians as having a good sense of humor, but that's my prejudice because I don't
Hmm.
know any Russians. So,
Yeah.
but I just don't think of Russia as being funny in any way. It seems like a very serious, somber,
Hmm.
dark, mean in a lot of ways. Not
Hmm.
everybody, but I don't know it well enough to really say for sure. But when he said death isn't funny, I could have named. I could start naming off shows to him which in which death had been funny. It seemed like a stupid statement, you know.
Hmm.
Death cannot be in a comedy because death is never funny.
Hmm.
But I just thought um, anything, if it's handled right, can almost anything can be funny. Not something. Something's like when somebody dies tragically,
Hmm.
and a comedian tries to make a joke of it that weekend,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
always bomb. You know,
Sure.
you need some time between
Yeah.
it. But why is that true? Why can you make a joke about somebody who died 20 years ago, but not somebody who died a week ago?
Well, I mean, mainly because it's, the pain of it has already somewhat faded. Ari Shafir made a joke about Kobe Bryant like hours later. You know what I
Oh,
mean? And
really?
he got
Wow.
rightfully canceled. And I was just like, dude, what are people are suffering? You know what I mean? This is not the time for
Yeah.
your cool quips. You know what I mean? Because you want to beat the
Yeah.
curve of like
Yeah.
too soon. Like there's a sit. There's a and again, this is what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
There's a misconception about comedy, and usually because comedy tends to be mean, that there's not a sensitivity from the person delivering a joke. Like they have no, care about people. Usually comedy comes from like kind of an uncomfortability with not being able to either relate or handle that moment themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I happen to smile at very inappropriate times, and I was looking it up the other day to see like why is that? Why do I smile at moments that are very? But
You're you're a scumbag.
yeah, I'm a scumbag. That's definitely true. But it's also because I'm very uncomfortable and I
Oh,
don't know
yeah,
how to
yeah.
handle the moment. I don't want somebody to feel bad, and it's such a serious topic that I end up smiling. It's just the fucking worst, and I laugh thinking about it, which makes it even more callous seeming. But it's not that I feel
Yeah.
that way. It's just that I don't know how to handle it. You know.
No, that's like it's so tricky. It's so tricky to tell somebody. So it's people who have a gift, a talent for writing comedy can be nurtured and supported, and their talent can be honed.
Hmm.
But you can't give them the talent. You can't teach them the talent
Yeah.
because there's something about a sense of humor that is very, very, very odd.
Hmm.
Sense of humor is it always borders on pain, it
Hmm.
seems. Almost
Yes.
always. It always
Yeah.
borders on pain.
Yeah. There's a certain
It's
kind
kind
of
of a defense
meanness.
against pain. I think
Hmm.
laughter is a defense against pain. So,
Hmm. And that's like comedians when like a lot of people like the moment where a heckler gets what's coming to them. But
right.
usually there's a certain kind of viciousness. And that's the thing about a comedian that you don't really want to tangle with. And, those schoolyard jokes of like your mama jokes or like capping on people. I was never good at that. Like I did that one time. This is the fucking worst, man. So I'm never good at that kind of shit. And I'm on the bus one time and we're going home, from school, and somebody said something to me, and out of the blue I decided to like this is my moment. So I said, "You're just mad because your dad has breast cancer." Which typically would be a funny joke because most dudes
Yeah.
don't get breast cancer.
But
The
he
whole
did.
fucking bus dropped, and they're like,
Uh,
"Fuck, dude, this is why this happens to me whenever I do this kind of shit. If I try to act cool or anything like that, it backfires." His dad had just died, and I didn't know that.
Oh no.
Yeah, so fucked
Oh.
up. And I felt horrible, you know what I mean? But it was just, I just thought we were doing like a banter thing, you know what I mean? And it was just ill timed.
Well, that's what I was saying too. If you're home alone or you're with friends, you will do jokes that are politically incorrect,
Sure.
but you know those people well enough to know there's no bigotry or racism or prejudice involved. It's just, it's funny because so inappropriate.
Right.
And you can't do that on television. You can't do that in any form on television.
Yeah.
You can't do it.
Yeah.
And then
Or
so
on the
people say,
bus.
oh, so you're this kind of guy who likes to sit at home and tell racist jokes. No, I don't do that. But I'm just saying I
Yes.
do sometimes laugh at things that are inappropriate. So I'll
Yeah.
laugh at a poop joke that I wouldn't laugh. I would
Yeah.
never put in a script, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Like I don't like fart jokes almost under any circumstance, but I have laughed at
yeah,
them occasionally. You know what I mean?
yeah,
But we've learned a lot tonight about culture and comedy. You know, like we've talked a lot about that, but we know that Russians don't find death funny, and
yeah,
Chinese people don't think elderly people can be funny. And
right.
you know,
And they're
that's actually
wrong.
very fascinating. You know, culture, and that's the other thing about comedy is it's very cultural. You know, like what you and I might find funny as comedians, or not comedians, but comedy writers, comedy fans, we probably have a different sense, and I know for a fact we have a different sensibility just from growing up around comedy. You have more of an edge of what you find funny versus somebody who doesn't really dabble in that world.
Yeah,
They're
it's
a lot
true.
more sensitive, you know?
You're saying about how comedy is culture sensitive. So, for example, uh, um, David Lloyd wrote one of the best half-hour comedies ever. It's called Chuckles Bites the Dust.
Mm-hmm.
It's an episode of Mary Tyler Moore.
Right.
He was invited to France to a guest speaker program to speak in front of an auditorium full of people. Now here it won his best script that year and got him all kinds of accolades. And he went over to France and they showed it before he spoke, and there wasn't one laugh. He tells the story, says there wasn't one laugh. They thought it was the most offensive thing that you could just see in there. They couldn't understand why people thought it was funny that this clown dies and everybody's making funny jokes about how a clown would die,
Mm-hmm.
and Mary doesn't. But at his funeral, when the minister is describing what Chuckles used to do for laughs, he makes her laugh. She starts laughing, and then everybody's upset with her then.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't play in France at all. They just did not get it. They didn't see why that was funny.
They have a
And
huge affection for clowns.
is that it?
No, no,
Maybe.
I just
No,
think
they
like
do because
I
they
think
love
mimes and shit. You know?
I see this. You can think something's a joke that's not a joke, or something is a joke that when it isn't. But
I wonder what it is actually, you know, that they found so offensive, you know.
I don't know. Maybe
I
they're
went,
like Russians. They don't think death is funny. Is that
yeah,
possible?
that could be. Yeah.
I don't know. But I don't know if all Russians think death's not funny. This one guy who was the head of this development program said that in Russia, death is not funny.
Hmm. When I think of Russians, I didn't realize that they had sunny days. I thought it only snowed. And that was up until like
Really?
maybe a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
That was pretty
When you were
recent.
there with
Yeah.
a heavy jacket on a sunny day. So.
Yeah, I thought they just wear those fur caps and like, you know, Adidas tracksuits and,
Well,
you know,
in China, I think I told you that the thing that surprised me was how much they did laugh.
yeah, they actually started stand up recently. They started doing stand up.
Yeah, well, they were laughing a lot, but they would not have an old person say a snarky line, and they would not allow you to say anything against, obviously, China or Chinese people,
Yeah.
even if it was if somebody says it about themselves. No, it just was not acceptable. So
Hmm.
basically, they said, "Look, we want you to get a bunch of people together, and we don't want them to have any conflict. We just want it to be funny."
Yeah.
You go, well. I'm sorry, but conflict is the basis of drama and comedy. So with no
Yeah.
conflict, you've got a very dull show, which we did. And then they said, "Oh, this show's dull." Yeah. I want
Yeah,
to punch him in the face. You know,
they're
you
disappointed
know
at their
what?
own. Yeah,
You don't.
yeah, it's very interesting. And like culturally, like when I was early film school stuff, when we'd watch third world country movies, third world movies.
Yeah.
Africa doesn't have a lot in their category, and it was always just such a very unusual, what I would consider unusual, because I grew up in Western Hollywood, construct of movies, so you get a very specific sense of what movies are. One thing I noticed is they still had a lot of jokes in their I think I watched Baraka or something like that. I don't know what the
Uh-huh.
movie was, but there was a sense of all this other, the apartheid and different elements of strife and struggle and everything. But there were villagers that were making fun of a guy being impotent and not being able to impregnate his wife, and like they were really like deriding him for this. You know what I mean? And I was like, wow, it kind
Wow.
of shocked me, that there are certain things that do translate, like physical humor, for example, which is maybe why Charlie
Yeah.
Chaplin or even like Chevy Chase, more recently, or other people are considered so funny all around the world. And when you brought up the French, I was thinking they like Jerry Lewis, and
Yeah, that's why when you said they love clowns, I thought you meant it because I was thinking, well, they love Jerry Lewis, who basically was just a clown.
yeah. And I thought
Uh,
Jerry Lewis was hilarious when I was growing up. I thought he was
yeah,
the best, because
but he
I
was a
would see like,
clown. He wasn't a clever, thoughtful guy. He was a clown. He
but
did
he was the one
comic
that
shows.
he's like the reason that we have multi-camera shows. He created like that 3-camera setup. I thought, isn't that true? He did a bunch of things for film and television that we do now that
Well, they
were.
say Desi Arnaz created the
Oh, okay,
multi-camera show, but I
okay.
don't know. Maybe there's some overlap, and who's claiming credit for it, I don't know. But it's
I
around
could
the
be
same.
wrong too. I could be totally wrong. You know what I mean? But I knew that he did something that was pretty cutting edge for film and television that we do today, which I was like, oh, I never knew that. But yeah, I mean, I'd always heard that the French love Jerry Lewis, which I always thought made the French seem even cooler because I like Jerry Lewis,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
also like French. I like the French. You know what I mean? I always thought the
yeah.
French were really cool. So but I had a French stepdad when I was growing up, so he was always really
Oh,
cool. Yeah, and that's where I got
yeah.
my quiche affiliations and stuff like that.
Oh, you're quiche, and
Yeah.
also why you never mind. I'm not going to play back on the same joke again.
Yeah, but
So, oh, yeah. So I think maybe we got to wrap this one up because I think
okay.
we've been on for about what 2 hours.
Almost 3. Well, I don't know. I started my clock early. Oh, it stopped
Oh,
recording. That sucks.
oh
Well,
no.
no, I mean the
Oh,
backup
oh.
mic. So this is still
Well,
good.
I was just thinking for you because I know it's
What
it's
time is it?
it's just about 10:30 for you that
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
you gotta hit the sack soon. So,
Yeah,
oh,
well, we
you
can wrap it
don't.
up. But I think it was a very interesting topic, actually.
Yeah, you know what I think some of it got very political, but it was always political in how it affects entertainment,
Yeah,
you know?
in our
And
world, which is comedy, comedy writing, TV and stuff. And obviously, it does affect us because NBC has decided not to,
yeah.
have
Did you ever
comedies.
did you ever watch Veep?
I watched the episodes that I did watch. I liked, and I really liked Julie Louis-Dreyfus. I think she's very funny. So, but I'm
Yeah,
not. I
but
couldn't quote anything.
it was very offensive about American politics if you want to be offended,
Hmm.
it just made everybody look like idiots. Maybe they
Yeah,
are. Maybe American politicians are all idiots, but that's how it looked.
there's something to be said. Some truth there. I mean, it's hard to watch politics.
Yeah.
That's a slippery world.
But it's really interesting. This all started because you told me that NBC didn't put any comedy into their new lineup. And as I said, my two impressions, one is that we're taking ourselves too seriously now. And so that's why we're not laughing as much.
Hmm.
And secondly, because there's a trend to make comedies less funny for
Hmm.
some reason. And that's been going on for about 10 years, long time. It's been toning down fewer and fewer laugh out loud moments and more really heavy dramatic moments and calling things comedies that don't really seem to play as comedies at all, where there's almost no laughs.
I just thought of a third reason.
What?
So during the pandemic, the bars shut down, so people aren't
Ah,
going out to bars. They're not letting loose. They're not drinking. I mean, I don't know if they're drinking as much, but that's a place where
yeah.
you kind of laugh off the week. You know what I mean? You have some rollicking good laughs with a couple of beers and some friends or whatever, It depends on how you drink. I mean, if you could drink yourself into a stupor and fall off the stool, then people are going to also find that funny. So they're going to enjoy that moment, So I wonder if our sensitivity, it's got to be tied into the pandemic and, the heightened fear that we're all living under. But I wonder if there's some truth to that because, the watering hole is where a lot of people kind of go and cut loose. They loosen their tie a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Funny. Drunks have never been very funny to me because
Right.
drunks are too offensive
And
and
super obnoxious.
obnoxious. They're
Yeah.
mostly obnoxious. I don't find drunks funny, and I
Hmm.
also the weird thing is I find vomiting funny.
Yeah. I write a I write a lot of vomiting into my stories for
Yeah,
some reason, and people are always like, "You got a lot of vomiting in here," and I was like, "I know, right? It's good stuff." And
it's
they're like, "You might
funny.
want
Isn't
to
that
take that
funny?
out."
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, no, man.
But what's funny is the people who had told that to me, they're very sensitive. You know what I mean? And some people have like, I, I guess they say it's empathy, which I'm not saying I don't have empathy, but if I see other people throw up, I don't feel the need to throw up. It's not like that.
Yeah.
But
It
some
just looks
people,
so. It just looks so absurd. That's it. That's an incongruity or an absurdity joke.
yeah,
A pig with their mouth open wide
yeah,
and projectile vomiting coming out
yeah,
is not how it's supposed to be.
yeah.
So it just looks so ridiculous that it makes me laugh, even though a moment later I'll feel terrible if that person is really sick.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's that and but that was part of what made Jackass funny, you know what I mean? These guys are throwing up all over the place for whatever reason. Especially Steve-O, you know what I mean? They do the grossest stuff and again, that's
Yeah.
another kind of humor, that's a base humor. When I read the history of SNL, Lauren Michaels has a very clear distinction between low comedy and high comedy. And he has a tendency in SNL, at least at the time, to do high comedy,
Yeah.
and I always like really respected that perspective, and like that's why I'm not really into toilet humor or anything like that. Occasionally it will make me laugh, you know what I mean? I'm not
Yeah.
completely I'm not walking around with my head inflated, but it just doesn't really strike me as being the funniest thing. But yeah, I write I write vomit stuff into my scripts pretty often.
No, I also think farts are funny, which one of the funniest or the biggest laugh scenes in Blazing Saddles was when they were all just farting after eating beans. It was not a clever scene.
Yeah.
The guys eat beans, and there's the stereotype or the false sense is that beans start making you fart right away, and they do. They can become gassy, but
Yeah.
there was nothing clever about that. They sat and ate beans, and then they all just started, farting. All you heard was all these different fart noises.
Hmm.
Why was that funny? I did not find that funny.
That's actually, it's if we were going to get back to being, philosophical and analytical. So right now we're in a moment where historically we're not allowed to find things funny, right? So, and Mel Brooks came from a world where you would typically not find things funny, like Holocaust survivors and living under a Nazi regime and, having family members disappeared or whatnot. And so I wonder if the comedy that does come back will be more crass and less intellectual type of humor in the beginning, because I think we've kind of nailed the idea down that we will have to have comedy. It will have to
Yeah,
exist. So it'll
yeah.
be interesting to see what kind of comedy comes out of this.
Well, I think this is a huge mistake by NBC because if NBC had done like ABC did and kept at least one comedy, that
Hmm.
one comedy would have taken off because it would have been their only comedy in their lineup.
Hmm.
To not be able to find one, there wasn't one spec script, one pilot written shot in their season that was good enough to put on the air. How's that possible?
I don't know, but I don't know if NBC even ran Man Seeking Woman, but I think they should bring that back because that show was funny. I really liked that show. I thought that was on some next level genius shit. But Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they don't have any comedies, but I know they didn't pick up any comedies. So I don't know if,
No, I'm sure they bought some pilots, and I'm not sure. I'm guessing they bought pilots and they shot some pilot scripts, and they just didn't like them well enough.
mhm.
But what does that say about it that the whole network can't find one example of a good enough of a comedy that was written well enough to put on their schedule? Is that either says that the comedy writing is falling way off, or we're losing our sense of humor? One or
I'm
the
going to
other.
assume it's the audience. I'm going to assume it's the audience, whoever is the immediate audience looking at what type of, it could be the content, but usually because we know, like we talked about, it's cultural. If you have a friend, for example, and you have a long-standing relationship with that person, you don't have to say much sometimes to make them laugh. It could be a look or a reference to something you thought was funny before. So
Yeah.
it's the audience, I think. And I told you how like one time I wrote a feature and the producer didn't think that my jokes about the beard off that we had during the Civil
Oh,
War
right.
reenactment was funny because she was a woman. I say, that sounds redundant. But from a woman's perspective, she didn't find it funny because she doesn't shave her face, right? And so I was
Yeah.
just like,
That's
I thought it was kind
it's
of ridiculous. And she went to the girl sitting next to her when we were at lunch after the reading and was like, "Did you find it funny?" And she was like, "I didn't really find it funny." Now, of course, this was at a reading, so it doesn't necessarily always come off right during a reading.
right.
But my whole perspective was my wife came up with that. You know what I mean? Like because of her anthropological
Yeah.
background and understanding the importance of beards at the time. So I just took what she was giving me and I thought, oh yeah, there's some funniness to that. And I kind of modified it a little bit. But I was thinking, it's not because I'm misogynistic that I created this, comedy bit. It's because, my wife had told me about, so I would have never thought about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No,
And
it
I was,
just shows how stupid that kills me too, because I did it enough years to hear some of the stupidest comments from people who are supposed to be smart, from development people who give you notes that are just plain stupid. To say that's not funny because women don't shave their faces is just absurd.
yeah,
It's absurd. I mean, we laugh at, you can laugh at stuff that we laugh at things that the other gender does all the time that we don't do. Then when we can relate to it on some level, even if it's just an observation. But how can somebody tell you? It's like saying death cannot be funny.
right. Old
Uh,
people can't be crass
yeah,
or,
can't be crass or have strong
or
attitudes.
self-effacing or something.
Yeah, so
If I had written one of the characters to have the hairiest legs and that was their entry into the beard off, you know what I mean, then maybe there would have been some, or hairy armpit, something that women shave, or side pubes or whatever. I don't know, maybe that would have been like the thing that really struck a chord. And now you're a funny guy, you know what I mean, like you're not some misogynistic prick. But it's like, come on man, like I can't help that I'm a male or brown or, you know, devilishly good looking or hyper intelligent. These are things that I can't really do anything about. So,
right.
it's like, why, try to make me feel less than, you know what I mean? Because that's not what that, I just think it's ridiculous,
No, it's just stupid. I'd rather have somebody say to me, "Look, I don't get the joke, or it doesn't work for me," and leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
totally.
not, no, it won't work for anybody who doesn't shave their face.
Yeah.
You go, what?
There's like people who say that women aren't funny. And I find that to be supremely
Oh,
ridiculous.
right. Very, yeah, misogynistic in that some of the funniest comedians are women. They don't go into stand up as much as men just because of social standards or whatever.
Pressure, yeah.
But that doesn't mean they can't be as funny, because some of the ones who are there are as funny as the men, or funnier.
Yeah, I remember you were saying like what shows you've been watching recently, and I was like, oh, you got to check out Lady Dynamite by Maria
Oh,
Bamford.
uh-huh. Yeah, I saw that. It was funny.
Supreme, I love that show. I thought I
Yeah.
watched the whole season. I was kind of bummed that they didn't bring it back. I thought she had a very unique take and was super funny. And then also Bubblegum, English show that I don't know if you got a chance to watch it because I don't know if it was
I
still on
didn't see
Netflix.
Bubblegum. I couldn't. I tried to find it and I couldn't find it, but I did watch
I
that.
think her name was Kamala, or not Kamala, but Kamala or something. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
But that show was really well written, and I just was like, wow, I was really impressed with how strong her perspective was. And that's the thing too about comedy is a lot of it is not just crass jokes or saying a funny punchline. It is a perspective. You have a perspective. It's not just that your observations about, Jerry Seinfeld isn't funny because he talks about cereal and Superman. It's his perspective about those things that makes it funny, and
Yeah.
people kind of lose sight of that, you know.
Yeah. No,
So
I firmly believe. I always say this to when I'm teaching somebody that as a writer, you have the whole universe to pull from.
mhm.
Nobody can tell you that one thing can't be funny. I'm sure there is something that can't be funny. I'm sure, if
And
I
there's
thought
always going to
hard
be
enough,
something
I
that
think
can't
of,
be funny to that person. Like there's things I
yeah,
probably don't find funny that other people will laugh their ass off, but I can't like
yeah.
say they're wrong because they find it funny and I
No,
don't.
to say, yeah, no, that's not funny because goat droppings are gooey.
Yeah, yeah,
You go, whoa, you got a problem, fellow.
yeah,
You think about that? I
yeah,
didn't even hear anything except that he brought the goat feces to his workplace. I mean, who does that?
yeah. And I thought the joke was that it was in a lunch bag. You know what I mean? When you were
Yeah,
first saying
yeah.
it,
No, it was because it was in a lunch bag and it was feces, and I think somebody wanted some of it or whatever. I don't know. All I remember is that the one thing it picked on was whether it was pellets or droppings.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. That's very
So,
fascinating.
yeah. I can tell you some of the other censoring things too that were interesting over the years, but we'll do that another time because
All right.
I'm kind of exhausted now, and
Yeah.
it's very late for you because you're 2 hours ahead of me. So
Yeah, it's coming up on 11. Well, that was a great show. So, yeah, we could cut it out here.